I'm Scott Simmy. I am the editor-in-chief of DroneDJ.com, and today we're talking about the new or impending DJI FPV drone. All right, I have what's called an SME or a subject matter expert with me today, and that expert is Eric Bell. Eric, welcome.
Thanks, Scott. How you doing?
Good. Listen, tell me first of all what you do, where you work.
So yeah, I work at a drone company called SkyX. I'm the lead manufacturer there. We deal with large-scale UAVs that fly over assets like oil and gas pipelines for surveillance. So yeah, that's what I do.
And you're also an FPV pilot of some renown, actually, even though you probably wouldn't say that, but you're an excellent FPV pilot and drone racer. Tell us a bit about how you learned how to do this and how long you've been flying.
Yeah, so I do fly FPV drones as well as, work at a drone company that deals with large drones. So I kind of, I enjoy the whole range of them. I started flying when I was 24, I think. So it's been about 5-6 years. And yeah, it's been a really great journey. I really enjoy flying these little guys for personal enjoyment and also for a little bit of work on the side. I do a lot of filming with a company in Toronto called DroneDJ, and we do a lot of cool FPV shots. So.
Actually, we spoke with Tom Comet of DroneDJ back on an early episode of our podcast, The Buzz, which maybe I'll link to below as we get going. So tell us a little bit more about the learning curve. I mean, you don't just pick up an FPV drone the same way traditionally as you do a standard DJI product. Maybe you could talk about the differences.
Yeah, sure. So when I first started, it was very new. DJI did have a drone out, maybe the Phantom 1. But I didn't want to get into that. I saw a different side of drones where, people could do flips and rolls, and the drones were really powerful and acrobatic. So I wanted to get into that, and that side of things is a lot more difficult to get into because when a drone flies, they're smart enough now to keep themselves level. So a DJI drone will keep itself level and keep itself in space, in place. But an FPV drone, you have the option to turn all of that off and have manual control over it. So you can do whatever you want. It's sort of like a fighter pilot kind of feel. And the learning curve is large. When I first got my first drone shipped from China, it was an FPV kit, and I put it together. And the first time I flew it, I crashed it and broke a couple arms. It's a very difficult skill to learn, getting your hands on the sticks properly and doing coordinated turns and flips and rolls are always scary the first time. So that whole learning curve was very hard back then. Nowadays, I find when someone wants to get into FPV, I usually give them a radio. And that radio can connect to a simulator on your computer, and you can get a lot of those first crashes out of the way. So you don't have to spend a lot of money on repairing your drone and, being down out of the air. So with one of my best friends who actually works at Rotor Geeks now, Tomas, he started on a simulator, and I said, play this for a month or something like that, and he did. And he showed me how good he was, and he was really, really good. So I just gave him one of my drones, and he was able to fly it like that. So it's a big learning curve, but you can deal with it in multiple ways. I just took the hard route because simulators weren't that good back then.
And now it's not just using a simulator or having crashes. There's Betaflight Configurator, OpenTX Companion, all these other bits and pieces of software if you really want to tweak it and if you're building yourself. And maybe you could give us a sense too that there's a lot of learning that happens on that side.
I mean, beyond just buying an FPV drone and flying it, building them is one of my main passions, right? Like the electronics and the software that go into making these things fly is what drew me to them in the first place. It's a 50-50 split, between how they fly and how much fun it is to build them and learn about them. So yeah, there's all sorts of great things to learn in an FPV drone. You know, there's brushless motors, which are used in many applications all over the world. That's an incredible thing to learn. There's, you know, electronics. There's communication. You know, you learn about UARTs and RX and TX. You learn about speed controllers, which control brushless motors. And you learn about frequencies and all sorts of other things. It's really like a very, very good thing to get into, to expand your knowledge. And I think that's why you see a lot of STEM education programs building drones. You know, there's a lot of drone programs in schools because they're a very cool thing and they teach you so much. So.
And I guess the thing is that there are some people out there who maybe don't want to do all that learning. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of people who are gravitating more towards, you know, ready to fly kits, you know, almost ready to fly kits, just drop in your preferred receiver. And a lot of companies are starting to make it easier to not have to build them so much, for sure.
Now, what do you think about the new DJI drone? We've seen some pictures of it now. We've even seen one shot of it hovering and a very blurry video of it in flight. What are your impressions so far?
So my first impression is it looks very DJI. I always have liked, you know, the way the Mavic looks. It definitely gives off that aesthetic. My first impression of it was, as an FPV pilot who, you know, likes to fly hard and crash hard, it's definitely not for that type of flying. It's more geared towards the cinematic type of flying. And just by looking at it, I can kind of tell that it's not going to easily take a hard crash. You know, the gimbal out front, you know, it's you can hit it into a tree and it looks like it would be a pretty hefty repair. So our drones are built a lot more rugged. They're made out of carbon fiber. They have all sorts of 3D printed TPU parts all over them to protect your electronics. And they're very strong. They can take really hard crashes and get back up. So if that's the type of flying that somebody would want to do with this, and for all we know, it's capable of it. I think it would be pretty dangerous.
Now, I'm guessing because DJI is known for this really pleasant out-of-the-box experience, right? You pull your drone out, you turn it on, and even if you've never flown anything else in your life, if you sort of read a couple of pages or do one simple tutorial in the software of the app, you're flying.
Yeah.
What do you think? I mean, it seems to me that that's the customer base. So would you anticipate there are going to be some modes on this drone that will allow you to do the same thing?
Yeah. So from what I know, there's going to be a few modes to this drone. In my mind, they would be something like a very stabilized GPS hold. You know, very similar to a Phantom or a Mavic. And then another mode would be your sort of Mavic Sport mode that you've had in the past with the Mavic drones. They can be put into sport mode. They won't let you do flips or rolls or anything like that, but it is a lot faster, and you know, you can get some more dynamic shots with it. Then I think, obviously, you know, it's called DJI FPV drone, so I think at some point they're going to have a mode that will let you go full acro mode or full rate mode, basically full manual control, to basically take over the drone and do whatever you want with it. The very interesting side of that is that with modes in a drone, you can switch between them instantaneously. So if you wanted to, say, be in sport mode with your Mavic and you got into some trouble, you could automatically switch it into position hold, and it would just stop. It would just stop in place and it would hang out and just wait for you to figure out what's going on. So that's a very enticing feature or ability for an FPV pilot trying to capture you know, a difficult shot. So I see this being used in a space where it's a more professional space. They want to get a, you know, some sort of really dynamic shot, but you also want that kind of safety or security aspect that a Mavic brings. So, you know, you could be flying along and getting a very dynamic shot, and all of a sudden, you know, your video feed starts to go a little blurry, or, you know, you feel uncomfortable in some way, and you just flick that switch, and it can either, you know, return to home or sit in its place. So that's a very good, you know, advantage.
Do you think, and this just occurred to me, so it could be a really dumb idea, but do you think it's possible, so let's say it has some sort of acro mode and you're flying away trying to do your flips, etc. Do you think it's possible that they could include something in the software where you set an altitude limit so that you try those acrobatic moves when you're learning them at a higher altitude, and if you kind of lose control and the drone senses that it's sort of plummeting earthward, that perhaps one of these sort of position hold or more stable kind of things might kick in automatically? Or do you think that's like a wacky idea?
No, that's not a wacky idea. That's actually very possible. You know, all of the hardware and software is actually there for that to happen. They already do altitude limiting, and they do geographic limiting as well. So maybe in the past you've noticed when you plug in your DJI drone, you're in a no-fly zone, right? So that's just GPS. That's just it knowing where you are in the world, and it putting a barrier around you. And if it gets to that barrier, it'll just stop. So something like that sort of already exists. It wouldn't be far-fetched to think that, you know, that if there were the need for it, you could put an altitude limit in reverse, right? You want to stay above 100 feet before you kick into some sort of some sort of level mode.
So we've been saying in our stories that all racing drones are FPV, but not all FPV drones are racing drones. And I think we're kind of trying to hint at the fact that DJI potentially is going to produce an entirely new type of drone. I mean, do you see this as being kind of a new market segment?
Yeah. So when we think about an FPV drone, you know, sometimes racing comes to mind, and the speed and everything, you know, the flips and tricks and all the crazy things that they can do. That comes to our mind, but you know, people are using them for a lot of different things. People are using them for very cinematic things, for movies and TV. And those drones are built to a different spec, so they fly a little bit different. They can carry, you know, heavier payloads, heavier cameras, and things like that. So on the small end of things, you have something like a Drone Squirt, which carries a GoPro, and it's ducted, and you know, it's very renowned. It's a good system that delivers good footage. The main advantage of it is that it has ducts around it, so if you were using it around people or in small spaces, the props wouldn't be able to hurt anybody. So that's one thing that, you know, for example, this drone could do without if it was just a racing drone. But these things that we add to it add to the safety aspect, they add to the capability of its HD recording. And then something a little bit bigger than that would be like a 5-inch drone with a GoPro on it. These are being used to film all sorts of, you know, drift events, cars, chases, you know, basically chasing anything that moves pretty fast, because these things can go very fast. And then on a bigger scale, something like the Drone's Thick, where you're carrying like a red camera or a Z camera, and they go very fast, and they can do all sorts of things that these guys can do as well. They can do flips and tricks and rolls, but they're meant for that, you know, heavy payload, good quality video, what that film industry is looking for.
I'm going to ask you to speculate a little bit. I mean, we believe 4K is a given for resolution. Any thoughts on what the price for this combo package might be? I mean, we're just pulling prices out of the air, but I think you can kind of make an educated guess based on the fact we know the goggles, for example, retail for $529 US, and then you're getting a controller and you're getting the drone. So, do you have any ballpark idea? Have you given it any thought?
Yeah. So obviously, looking at the renderings, the pictures of it that we've seen so far, it's not going to lend itself well to crashes. It looks like if you put this thing into the dirt at 60 kilometers an hour, you'd be paying a hefty price to repair it. It doesn't, they may sell parts separately that you can put on and replace. DJI does a very good job of designing their internals with ribbon cables and all sorts of other things, but it's usually pretty jam-packed. And people get their DJI drones worked on today, so I don't see that really changing. If somebody were to buy this because they think it's an easy system to fly, they don't have a lot of experience, and they were to crash it, I would assume that they would just take it to somebody to get repaired, because they're not even diving into the building it themselves world, so I don't think that they would want to do that. So obviously the racing guys are looking at this like, oh, it's basically a Mavic Sport Plus type of deal. So the racing guys aren't going to use it. They're going to stick with their very fast, ultra light builds that are spec'd for racing.
One of the things that I've noticed, now there are only a few images that are available, and the very first image I think was heavily pixelated, but on the most recent image where we kind of see the drone sitting there and the box, is that it appears to me as though the forward motors are pitched slightly forward with respect to the rear motors. I don't know if that's something you've picked up on in the images or if it's just a distortion, maybe it was shot with a wide angle lens, but have you picked up on that?
It looks sort of like that. It looks like the front motors might be tilted forward a little bit. They might be canted compared to the back. That doesn't traditionally make sense. A lot of drones tried to do that, but a lot of people strayed away from it. They might be trying something, and if they were trying something, that something would be keeping the drone camera level to the horizon while the drone itself travels forward. So the point of tilted motors would be that your motors are tilted forward and that your drone camera is staying level. So if that's something that they wanted to do, then that would be how they did it. But the disadvantage of that, would be you're always sort of flying forward. That the thrust coming out of your front props is always on an angle to your body, so you're always going to be pushing forward, unless they've made the front arms tiltable, which I'm not sure they would do.
Now, just as we were both, guessing, and I think it's a given, is 4K resolution. On a traditional racing drone, and even on a Cinewhoop drone, you are, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you're adjusting the angle of the camera that's going to capture your cinematic footage manually prior to flight.
Yeah.
Would you theorize, because I certainly would, that with the DJI FPV drone, you would have the option of controlling that from your controller?
Yeah. So if they've angled if they've gimbaled the FPV camera, then I would expect so. But again, I'm not sure if they're going to be two separate cameras, one for the HD recording and one for the DJI Air unit. The more that I think about it, it's not impossible that they have integrated them both into the same camera, because they've done that in the past with the Mavic. You get your HD recording, 4K, whatever comes off your brand of Mavic, and you also get that live transmission back to your controller. Now, that transmission is a lot higher latency than you would want in an FPV drone, but maybe they've made that integration where it is just one camera, and that would mean that your camera for HD and your camera for FPV are always going to be looking at the same thing. So that would be an advantage as well.
Now, you fly with the FPV goggles, and I think this is kind of a key part of the equation, is the fact that those goggles, from people in the know, really kind of blow everything else in the market away. Would you agree with that assessment?
Yeah, for what they're designed for, they're an incredible product, definitely.
So that arguably could be part of the anchor of this system that is really would make it appealing to people, regardless of what the price happens to be, is the fact that you know you're going to have sort of crystal clear digital transmission without any of the dropouts that we associate with analog. Yeah?
Yeah. So the DJI FPV system was released over a year ago now, and the HD video that comes back to the goggles from the air unit is very low latency, very high quality, and it breaks up and it has its quirks, obviously, because it's still 5.8, and you know it's not complete magic. It's very close to magic, but it's so much better than what I was used to with analog. In terms of video quality, latency is similar. For racing, some people still aren't on it, but yeah, that system is definitely an advantage.
And is there any scuttlebutt in your end around whether the goggles might be a new generation of goggles, or whether they will be exactly the same as the existing model?
Yeah, so I think that the first goggles were obviously large. They were a little bit too heavy for some people. I don't mind them too much, but they are a little bit big. On the box that I saw, it looked like the same goggles. They could just be, upgrading the receiver module, putting more, capability into the goggles and keeping them the same size, which I think for a lot of people would be okay. But yeah, like you said, the FPV system is really the heart of this and why people would want it, because their Mavic Pro, the latency that they see on their screen is just too high for some things.
Now, my guess is that DJI sees a couple of markets for this product. One is the person who wants to be able to film sort of cinematic FPV and everything that goes with that. And I think the other are the people we were talking about earlier who are really fascinated by FPV, but have always been kind of turned off by the immense barrier to entry in terms of all of the learning. So bearing that in mind, that some of the people might be first-time DJI customers and just want to get into FPV with something reliable, what do you hypothesize might be the price point of this combo?
Yeah, right. So you're right in the fact that, DJI has always catered to the non-FPV market, and they've kind of just tested out their air unit with us racing guys for the last year, and now they've made a product for exactly what you're saying, the person who wants to fly FPV, the person who wants to do those cool cinematic, dynamic shots, maybe some flips, maybe some rolls. So for this drone, just looking at it, it looks built in a similar fashion to the Mavic 2. Injection molded canopy and probably ribbon cables inside and all sorts of good DJI things, but that puts it at the price point of probably a Mavic 2, somewhere around there. And as you know, the goggles retail for $529 US, and the remote is a couple hundred on top of that, I believe. So, all in, I'd say easily over 2,000 US, but they might make that 2,000 price point.
Is it a product that you think would interest you, given that you can build pretty much anything you want?
Yeah, it definitely looks like an interesting product. Like I said, not sure if it's exactly for me in what I do, but Depending on what it looks like when it launches, I may have to pick one up. Definitely looks like a capable machine for, you know, filming cinematic things, movies and television. The Mavic gets used a lot for that. You know, commercial spots, things like that. So I see this doing very well in that type of environment.
All right, Eric Bell, you're a drone racer, an FPV pilot. You build cinewhoops and do high-end aerial cinematography, and you're a heck of a builder. So thank you very much for coming on and sharing your expertise today.
Appreciate it, Scott. Thanks, and I really appreciate, you know, all the work that you do for DroneDJ and keeping everybody informed with everything that's going on in the exciting world of drones.
Thanks very much. I appreciate that, Eric, and look forward to seeing you in person. Hopefully, we'll get one of these DJI FPV drones, maybe in the new year, in advance to review. So if I get one in my hands, I'll certainly give you a call.
Sounds great.
Awesome. Take care.
All right.
I'm Scott Simmy, editor-in-chief of DroneDJ.com. We will obviously keep following the DJI FPV drone story. There's intense interest in this, and man, we are super interested. That's it for now. We'll see you next time.